There is a weight you carry every single morning, is there not? A heaviness that sits in the chest before the alarm even finishes its cry. A kind of cold dread that smells like yesterday's disappointment and feels like a room with no windows. You already know what the day holds. You already know the number in the bank account. You already know the conversation you will avoid with your partner because the truth of where you are financially is too sharp to say out loud. And still, you rise, you dress, you go, and somewhere between the drive to work and the first hour at a desk that belongs to someone else's dream, a quiet voice asks the most dangerous question a human mind can entertain. Is this all there is? That question is not weakness. That question is a signal. And the reason it keeps returning, the reason it refuses to be silenced, no matter how many distractions you pile on top of it, no matter how many evenings you numb it with noise and screens, and the comfortable postponement of thinking too deeply, is something most people never discover. There is a reason this pattern keeps repeating in your life, and it has absolutely nothing to do with the economy, your education, the neighborhood you grew up in, or the opportunities you were or were not given. The reason lives somewhere far more intimate, far more powerful, and by the time this conversation ends, you will know exactly where to find it. But first, let us speak plainly about something that almost nobody wants to name. Napoleon Hill spent more than 20 years of his life studying the wealthiest, most accomplished men and women the industrial world had ever produced. He sat across from Andrew Carnegie, who built an empire from steel and silence, and the absolute refusal to accept the limitations others accepted as permanent. He studied Thomas Edison, Henry Ford, John D. Rockefeller. He did not study their bank accounts. He studied their minds. He studied the invisible architecture of thought that preceded every fortune, every innovation, every act of creation that moved civilization forward. And what he found, after 2 decades of relentless investigation, was both liberating and devastating in equal measure. It was liberating because the principle he discovered belongs to every human being who has ever drawn breath. It was devastating because almost no one ever uses it. The man who goes through his life believing that poverty is something that happens to him like weather, like illness, like the turning of tides, is a man who has surrendered the most powerful instrument in the known universe, his own mind. Hill watched fortunes built from nothing. He watched men who began with less than zero, men who began with debt and grief and every conceivable reason to fail, and he watched them construct wealth so vast it echoed across generations. And he asked them, every single one of them, what made the difference? What separated the man who built the empire from the man who merely dreamed of one? The answer was never luck. It was never timing, though. Timing played its role. It was never talent alone, though talent had its place. The answer, repeated across every interview, every study, every biography Hill consumed, was always some version of the same fundamental truth. The man who wins has decided, with a burning and unshakable certainty, that he will win, not hoped, not wished, not vaguely wanted while simultaneously preparing for failure. Decided, and yet here you are, intelligent, capable, perhaps more educated than those steel and oil titans ever were, with access to information they could not have imagined, with tools and platforms in global markets that Carnegie himself would have wept to see. And still, the momentum stalls. Still, the morning brings that familiar heaviness. Still, the brilliant idea sits in the notebook, untouched. Still, the business plan waits. Still, the investment never gets made. Still, the conversation about the future gets postponed to a tomorrow that keeps moving away from you like a horizon you can never reach. Why? That is the mystery this conversation will solve. Not theoretically, not philosophically, practically, precisely, with the cold clarity of a man who gave his entire adult life to the science of why some minds produce abundance while others, equally gifted, produce only more waiting. Now, before you absorb what comes next, consider this. If what you're about to hear resonates with something deep and half-forgotten inside you, if it lands with the sensation of recognizing something you have always known but never had language for, do something that will compound the value of this moment. Subscribe. Not as a passive act, but as a declaration. Every person who has ever built anything of lasting worth understood that committing to a source of growth is itself a form of growth. The mind that says, I will return to this place regularly. The mind that treats the cultivation of its own thinking as a non-negotiable appointment. That mind is already operating at a higher frequency than the one that consumes passively and disappears. And if this is striking something real in you today, say so. Tell this community what you're building, what you're breaking free from, what you're deciding as of this moment. Words spoken into the world carry a weight that words kept private never do. Hill understood this. He called it the first act of commitment. Let your comment be yours. Now let us move into the terrain where most people never dare to go. There is a woman, and Hill encountered countless versions of her in the families of the men he studied, who watched her husband spend 30 years doing work that diminished him. She watched from a proximity that was almost unbearable. She saw the way he came home each evening with something slightly smaller in his eyes than had been there the morning before. She smelled the specific scent of resignation on him, something like old paper and close rooms. She felt the temperature of the household change over the years from warm and electric with possibility to something muted and careful, as though everyone had unconsciously agreed never to want too loudly because wanting led to disappointment. Their children learned without a single lesson being formally taught that ambition was something other people had, that security meant staying small, that the right response to a big idea was a cautious smile and a list of reasons it would not work. This is not a story about one family. This is a story about the invisible curriculum that poverty of mind passes down through generations, written not in textbooks, but in body language, in the way a father's shoulders curve inward at the dinner table, in the way a mother's eyes go distant when someone on the TV describes a life that feels impossibly far from her kitchen. The children absorb it all, and they carry it forward into their own lives like a compass that has been deliberately broken, spinning in circles, returning them again and again to the same financial latitude their parents inhabited, and their parents before them. Hill called this the law of hypnotic rhythm, the tendency of every habit, every belief, every pattern of thought, to crystallize over time into something that feels as fixed and natural as gravity. The man who has never questioned his inherited beliefs about money, about his own worth, about what is possible for someone like him, is a man who is not thinking. He is reenacting, and there is a tragedy in that so profound that Hill spent years trying to find words adequate to it. Mira, the tragedy is not the poverty itself. The tragedy is the abdication. The tragedy is the human mind, this instrument of almost incomprehensible creative power, being used as nothing more than a storage unit for other people's limitations. And now comes the part of this conversation that demands you look at yourself with the honesty most people spend their entire lives avoiding. What is the thought that stops you? Not the excuse, the thought, the actual sentence that forms in the space behind your eyes when you stand at the edge of action. When the moment arrives to make the call, send the email, commit the capital, say yes to the terrifying and magnificent version of your own potential, there is a sentence there. There is always a sentence. And if you have been hearing that sentence for months or years, if its voice has become so familiar that you no longer even recognize it as a choice, but simply as reality, then you're living inside a prison whose bars are invisible, whose locks are made entirely of thought. And here is the paradox that Hill found at the center of every case of prolonged failure. The mind, your mind, my mind, the mind of every human being who has ever frozen at the moment of necessary action, uses the sensation of delay as a form of safety. It feels like caution. It presents itself as wisdom. It whispers that waiting is responsible, that more preparation is prudent, that the right moment is coming and patience is a virtue. And while it whispers, the years pass. Do you understand what that means? It means that the very mechanism designed to protect you is destroying your future. It means that the comfort you feel when you postpone is the comfort of a man sitting in a slowly flooding room, relieved that he has not yet had to climb through the window. The water rises, the relief remains, and the window gets harder to reach. This is not a metaphor. This is the biography of every person who arrives at the end of a life of genuine potential and finds themselves surrounded not by what they built, but by the ghost architecture of what they almost started. Hill wrote about this with a grief that was almost personal. He had seen too many of them, brilliant people. People with a fire in their thinking that should have lit the world. People who died with libraries inside them that no one ever read, with companies that never got incorporated, with inventions that someone else eventually built because the person who first conceived the idea could never bring themselves to act. The cruelest part, their families suffered for it. Their children grew up in the narrow corridor of what their parents' hesitation made possible. Their partners made quiet, private peace with a life that was less than what had been promised in the early years when both of them were still new enough to believe in everything. And the tragedy is not assigned only to the person who delayed. It radiates outward. It touches everyone in the orbit of the person who chose the imagined safety of waiting over the terrifying abundance of action. Fish 8. There is a cost to your procrastination that you are not paying alone. Your children are paying it in the quality of what is available to them. Your partner is paying it in the weight of unexpressed disappointment. Your grandchildren, who do not yet exist, are being assigned a starting position by the choices you make or fail to make today, and they will never know your name was the one who set their coordinates. Do you feel the urgency of that? Do you feel what it means that this is not about you alone? Because if you continue on the current trajectory, if the next 5 years look like the last five, if the same patterns of delay and almost and not quite yet define the decade ahead of you the way they have defined the decade behind you, then you will not simply fail to build the fortune you were capable of building. You will actively transmit the architecture of limitation to every person who depends on you. And the most insidious thing about that transmission is that it happens without announcement, without argument, without a single spoken word. It happens in the silences, in the choices that are observed, in the life that is modeled as normal when it is anything but. And now we arrive at the edge of the abyss, because here's what Hill discovered about the nature of time as it relates to the human mind and the pursuit of purpose. And this is perhaps the most uncomfortable truth in the entirety of his research. The mind does not experience urgency naturally. The mind, left to its own habitual patterns, is designed to preserve the status quo. It is designed to conserve energy, to avoid the metabolic cost of genuine change, to rationalize delay with such elegant fluency that the person doing the rationalizing genuinely believes they are being sensible, rather than afraid. And time cooperates with this deception beautifully. Because time does not announce itself, it does not arrive in your life as a measurable, visible commodity running out in front of your eyes. It simply passes, quietly, steadily, with no drama and no warning. And the gap between who you are today and who you intended to become does not announce itself as a gap either. It simply solidifies, slowly, the way stone solidifies from liquid. First, it is warm and moving and full of possibility. Then it is cool, then it is hard, then it is fixed. And one day, a day that will come for every person listening to this without exception, you will look at what your life has produced and compare it to what you believed it could produce. And the distance between those 2 points will tell you exactly what the accumulated cost of your hesitation was, not in regret alone, in the faces of the people around you, in the conversations you were never able to have because you could not afford them, in the experiences your children did not have because the money was not there, in the legacy that will not carry your name because you never built anything large enough to carry it. Escucha. This is not cruelty. This is clarity. And clarity, Hill always insisted, is the most merciful gift one mind can offer another. The comfortable lie that says there is still time, that tomorrow is as good as today, that your best work is still somehow ahead of you despite the fact that you're doing nothing different today than you did yesterday. That comfortable lie is the most expensive thing you will ever consume. It costs more than any failed investment. It costs more than any bad business decision, because a bad decision can be reversed. Time cannot. And here's the paradox that sits at the very heart of human suffering as Hill understood it. The very thing you are protecting by delaying, your sense of safety, your sense of not yet having failed, is the very thing your delay is guaranteeing you will lose. You cannot protect a future by refusing to build it. You cannot honor the potential inside you by keeping it permanently in preparation. The safety of waiting is an illusion, and the cost of that illusion is your one life. Now we turn toward the light, because Hill did not spend 20 years studying greatness to hand people a more sophisticated description of their own despair. He studied it to extract the operational principles of minds that produce, and to translate those principles into a language so clear and so actionable that any person, anywhere, with any starting point could apply them. What he found is not mystical. It is not reserved for the exceptional. It is not the exclusive property of the Carnegie family or the Rockefeller bloodline or the Edison workshop. It is a set of principles so fundamental to the architecture of the human mind that they function reliably for anyone who applies them with genuine commitment. And the first, the most foundational, the one without which nothing else operates, is the principle of the burning desire. Not a wish, not a preference, not a vague aspiration that lives somewhere in the middle distance of your imagination. A burning desire is something qualitatively different. Hill described it as the starting point of all achievement, and he was not being poetic. He was being diagnostic. Because what he observed in every single person who built lasting wealth was that their desire for a specific outcome had passed through some internal threshold beyond which it stopped being a thought and became a state. It became the ground they stood on. It became the air they breathed. It became so embedded in their identity that failure to achieve it was not merely disappointing, but genuinely inconceivable. Carnegie did not hope to be wealthy. Carnegie had decided, with a clarity so absolute it functioned as a physical force, that wealth was his inevitable destination. He did not know when, he did not know exactly how, but the certainty of the destination was not in question. And because it was not in question, every obstacle became a problem to be solved rather than evidence that he should stop. Every setback was data. Every failure was a course correction. The burning desire did not permit the luxury of permanent surrender, because permanent surrender would have required him to abandon something that had become as essential to his identity as his own name. That is what Hill is asking you to build in yourself. Not enthusiasm, not motivation, which is a feeling and therefore as unreliable as all feelings. Desire so specific, so defined, so deeply encoded in your thinking that it does not require the right mood to sustain it. It sustains itself. And how does one build that? This is where Hill's research becomes genuinely revolutionary and where most people, even those who have read Think and Grow Rich multiple times, miss the operative mechanism entirely. You do not build a burning desire by trying harder to want something. You build it by repetition, by the deliberate, consistent daily practice of bringing your mind into the presence of your definite chief aim until the aim and the mind become functionally inseparable. Hill called this autosuggestion, and it is one of the most powerful tools ever identified in the entire history of human psychology. The subconscious mind, Hill discovered through decades of observation, does not distinguish between a vividly imagined experience and an actual one. It processes both with the same neurological machinery. It responds to both with the same emotional chemistry. And because the subconscious is the engine that drives the vast majority of human behavior, including the micro behaviors and micro decisions that cumulatively determine whether a life expands or contracts, the ability to deliberately program it is not a spiritual nicety. It is a practical necessity. Here is how the principle operates in practice. Every morning, before the noise of the world enters your awareness, before the phone is checked and the obligations begin to press, you sit with your chief aim, not a list of goals. One aim, one specific, measurable, emotionally charged vision of the outcome you have decided to produce. You read it aloud, you feel it. You allow your mind to inhabit the reality of having already achieved it, with the specificity of a sensory experience, the temperature of the room where you make the decision, the sound of the call that changes everything, the weight of the moment when the number in the account reflects the work you have done. You do this with conviction, not because conviction comes naturally in the beginning, but because Hill understood that conviction is produced by repetition the same way muscle is produced by exercise. Do you understand what this means for the procrastination that has been running your life? Procrastination is not laziness. Hill was emphatic about this. Procrastination is the symptom of a mind that has not yet been given a clear enough destination to justify the discomfort of movement. A man who does not know exactly where he is going will always find reasons to stand still, because movement in an uncertain direction feels more dangerous than stillness. But a man whose mind has been saturated with a specific, vivid, emotionally charged destination does not need to overcome resistance to act. The action becomes the path of least resistance, because every cell in his body has been organized around a single point. This is why the burning desire is not the first step. It is the prerequisite. It is the operating system. Without it, every tactic, every strategy, every discipline, every productivity system you have ever tried has been software running on corrupted hardware. And you have felt that, have you not? The effort that somehow never compounds, the commitment that always unravels by week 3, the resolution that survives January and collapses in February. That is not a failure of character. That is a failure of architecture. The foundation was never built. Now build it. Mira. The method is so simple that the sophisticated mind almost always dismisses it. Hill knew this. He anticipated the skepticism of the intelligent reader, and he addressed it directly. The very fact that a principle seems too simple to be powerful is the surest evidence that it has not been genuinely applied. Because genuine application is not reading about it. Genuine application is the daily, deliberate, slightly uncomfortable practice of telling your subconscious mind what you have decided with such consistency that it stops questioning the instruction and begins organizing your entire perception of reality to confirm it. Write down your chief aim. Be exact. Not I want to be rich, but I will earn a specific amount by a specific date through a specific means. The specificity is not arbitrary. The specificity is the mechanism. A vague instruction produces vague behavior. A precise instruction produces precise movement. Your subconscious is waiting for a precise instruction. Give it one. Now, the second principle, and this one Hill considered so essential that he devoted more pages to it than any other single concept: the mastermind. Hill defined the mastermind as the coordination of knowledge and effort between two or more people who work toward a definite purpose in a spirit of harmony. And the reason he considered it indispensable to any serious pursuit of wealth is rooted in something he observed across every single one of his subjects without exception. No man, not Carnegie, not Ford, not Edison, not a single person in the entire catalog of self-made wealth that Hill spent 2 decades compiling, did it alone. This is where the mythology of the lone genius destroys more potential than perhaps any other single false belief. The story we tell ourselves about success, about the solitary visionary in the garage or the workshop or the midnight office, is a story that actively sabotages the real mechanism of great achievement. Because the mastermind is not merely about having partners or colleagues or a supportive network, though those things matter. The mastermind is about accessing a form of intelligence that literally does not exist inside any single mind in isolation. Hill observed something that many people categorize as spiritual, but which he insisted was simply the natural result of minds in genuine alignment. When 2 or more minds come together around a single purpose, with complete commitment and mutual support, the combined intelligence they produce exceeds the sum of its individual parts. This is not metaphor. Ford proved it. Carnegie built his entire enterprise on it. Edison's lab was the most famous example of organized collective intelligence in the history of American industry. And the reason this matters so urgently for you, for the person who has been trying to build something alone, carrying the full weight of the vision without the benefit of minds aligned with yours, is this: your procrastination may not be entirely your own. It may be the direct result of isolation, of attempting to navigate the unknown without the benefit of another mind that believes in the destination as fully as you do. Find yours. The mastermind is not a networking group. It is not a social obligation. It is a deliberate alliance formed with intention between people who hold a shared vision and who have committed to holding each other to the standards that vision demands. It is the difference between a fire that gutters in the wind because it is small and alone, and a fire that sustains itself because it has fuel from more than one direction. And now the third principle, which may be the most misunderstood of everything Hill ever wrote. Faith, not religious faith, not the blind suspension of critical thinking. The specific operational form of faith that Hill described as the visualization of and belief in the attainment of desire. And the mechanism through which this faith is produced is the same mechanism he identified for the burning desire: repetition. Consistent, deliberate, emotionally engaged repetition. Here's the paradox. Most people wait to feel confident before they act, and confidence never comes because confidence is produced by action, not by waiting for action to feel safe. The man who demands certainty before he moves will stand still forever because certainty is not given in advance. It is earned in the movement. Hill knew that the great builders did not begin with certainty. They began with faith, which in his precise definition meant the decision to act as though the outcome were already assured, while simultaneously doing everything in their power to produce it. Carnegie acted as though steel would make him the wealthiest man in America long before a single mill had been built. He did not have evidence for this belief. He had a decision, and the decision organized his perception, his relationships, his daily choices, and his response to every obstacle in a way that eventually produced the evidence he had already decided was coming. Veracity. This is the order of operations that almost everyone reverses. Most people say, "Show me the evidence, and then I will believe." The great builders said, "I believe, and therefore I will produce the evidence." This is not irrational. This is the single most practically effective operating principle a human mind can adopt, because it is the only one that keeps you moving through the inevitable valleys of difficulty that lie between every starting point and every worthy destination. And now we arrive at the principle that ties everything together, that makes the burning desire and the mastermind and the faith operative in the physical world, the specialized knowledge translated through organized planning. Hill was careful to distinguish between general knowledge and specialized knowledge. General knowledge, no matter how vast, is of limited value in the accumulation of wealth. The world is full of people with encyclopedic general knowledge who are financially nowhere. What produces wealth is knowledge organized around a specific purpose and applied with persistent action through a specific plan. This means stop studying everything and start mastering one thing. Stop preparing indefinitely and start planning specifically. A plan does not need to be perfect to be useful. Hill was emphatic about this. It needs to be specific enough to direct daily action and flexible enough to absorb the inevitable adjustments that reality will demand. A plan is not a prediction of the future. A plan is a declaration of intent that organizes today's behavior around tomorrow's destination. Write the plan not in your head, where it remains safe from the scrutiny of reality and therefore also safe from ever becoming real. On paper, with dates, with actions. with the specific commitments that separate the person who intends to do something from the person who does it. Because here is what Hill discovered about the relationship between written plans and the subconscious mind. The act of writing encodes commitment in a way that thinking alone cannot. When you write your plan, your subconscious mind receives an instruction that it treats categorically differently from a mental note. It begins to organize your perception around the elements of that plan. It begins to notice opportunities that it previously filtered out as irrelevant. It begins to generate the ideas and connections and intuitions that look from the outside like luck or inspiration, but are in fact the natural product of a mind that has been given a clear operating mandate. The man who calls this luck has not studied the mechanism. Hill studied the mechanism, and the mechanism says, the subconscious mind, properly programmed through repetition, written intention, and emotionally charged visualization, will begin to function as a creative force in the service of its dominant thought, not occasionally, not randomly, consistently. The way a compass consistently points north because it is aligned with a force larger than any single obstacle. Now, let us speak about the enemy within, because no conversation about building wealth and escaping the gravity of procrastination is complete without naming the force that most reliably destroys the plans and desires of intelligent people. Hill called it the 6 ghosts of fear. But for this conversation, let us reduce them to their essential core, because all 6 share a single parent: the fear of criticism, not the fear of failure, though that fear is real and powerful. The fear of criticism, the fear of being seen to try and be seen to fall, is the most socially embedded and therefore the most insidious inhibitor of action that Hill identified in his research. Because here's the paradox. The people whose opinions most reliably stop you from building your wealth are the people who will benefit most from you building it. Your children need you to risk being wrong. Your partner needs you to risk being judged. The future generations that carry your name need you to withstand the discomfort of being seen to pursue something that most of the people around you have already decided is beyond their reach. The opinion of a person who has not built what you're trying to build is not data. It is noise. And Hill was merciless on this point. A man who allows the noise of unexperienced opinions to redirect him from a path he has clearly defined is not being humble or careful or reasonable. He is surrendering his future to people who are not qualified to hold it. Whose voice is in your head when you hesitate? Name it. Because naming it removes its authority. Because the voice that tells you it is too late, you're not the right person, you do not have the right background, you're not young enough or smart enough or connected enough. That voice belongs to someone who is not building anything. It does not belong to the future version of you that is possible. And let us talk about that future version, because Hill believed, with the conviction of a man who had watched it happen too many times to call it coincidence, that the mind which consistently visualizes a specific version of itself eventually produces that version in physical reality. Not through magic. Through the cumulative effect of the thousands of small decisions that a mind organized around a clear vision makes differently from a mind operating in ambiguity. The man who sees himself clearly as a builder, as a creator of wealth, as the architect of a legacy that his children will inhabit, makes different phone calls than the man who merely hopes things will improve. He reads different books. He seeks different conversations. He responds to difficulty with a different emotional posture. And those differences, each one almost invisible in isolation, compound across months and years into outcomes so dramatically divergent that they appear, to the outside observer, to be the product of entirely different levels of intelligence or talent or luck, when in fact they are the product of nothing more than a different instruction given to the same fundamental human machinery. Your mind is the same machinery as Carnegie's. The machinery is identical. The instruction is different. Change the instruction. Here is how, in the most practical possible terms. Tonight, before you sleep, spend 15 minutes writing, not journaling in the sense of narrating your day, writing in the deliberate sense of programming your subconscious. Write your chief aim as though it is already accomplished. Write it in the first person, in the present tense, with as much sensory and emotional specificity as you can produce. Describe the life you have built. Describe what it feels like to stand in it. Describe what your children's lives look like inside the wealth you have created. Describe the sound of the conversations you now have, the quality of the decisions available to you, the freedom that is no longer a concept, but a daily experience. Read it aloud, then read it again in the morning. Do this every day for 30 days and monitor what happens to your perception of opportunity, to the ideas that arise in the quiet moments, to the quality of your decisions and the consistency of your action. Hill did not invent this practice. He documented it. He documented it in the lives of men who used it to build things that the world still lives inside of today. It is not a theory. It is an operational record of how great minds program themselves to produce great results. Now build your mastermind. Identify the one person or the two people whose alignment with your vision would most accelerate its realization. Not the most successful person you know. The most aligned, the person who, when you describe where you're going, does not offer you a careful list of reasons to be cautious, but leans forward and says, how do we get there faster? That person exists in your orbit or just beyond it. Find them. Be honest about your vision. Propose the alliance explicitly, because the aligned mind that you failed to recruit, because you were too proud or too fearful to ask, is the compounding force you will spend years rebuilding from scratch. And define the plan, not the perfect plan, the first real plan, with dates, with actions, with the specific commitment to do something every single day that moves the architecture of your life from where it is to where you have decided it will be. Napoleon Hill observed something about daily action that has been largely lost in the modern conversation about success. He noticed that the great builders did not necessarily work harder in terms of hours than the men who built nothing. What they did was work with a different quality of engagement. They brought the full force of their organized mind to each day's task rather than the scattered, half-present effort of a mind that is simultaneously everywhere and nowhere. Focused daily action, compounding across years, produced results that looked miraculous from outside and were in fact simply the natural consequence of consistent, organized effort applied in the direction of a clearly defined purpose. You have that capacity. You have always had that capacity. The procrastination was never a reflection of your ability. It was a reflection of the absence of a clearly enough defined, emotionally charged enough, deeply enough embedded purpose to make the cost of inaction feel more painful than the cost of action. Now you understand the mechanism. Now you can build the purpose with the deliberate precision of an engineer rather than waiting for inspiration to deliver it like weather. And here is the final truth that Hill carried with him through all of it, through 20 years of research, through the biographies of the greatest wealth builders the modern world had produced, through the thousands of people he counseled and the millions more he reached through his writing. The truth he returned to again and again, that lives at the center of every principle and every case study and every conversation he ever had about the science of achievement. The starting point is a decision, not a better economy, not a different upbringing, not a lucky break or a fortuitous introduction or a particularly favorable alignment of circumstance. A decision, a single moment of absolute, burning, irrevocable commitment to a specific destination, made with the full force of a mind that has stopped negotiating with its own potential. Carnegie made that decision in a room barely large enough to contain his ambition. Ford made it in a workshop that smelled of oil and metal, and the specific kind of possibility that only exists before anything has been built. Edison made it so many times in the face of so many failures that would have permanently retired a man of lesser commitment, that the decision itself became the most impressive thing about him, more impressive even than the light bulb. And you can make it today. Not tomorrow, not after the circumstances improve, not when the children are older or the debt is lower or the fear is smaller. Today, because the decision is not dependent on circumstances. The decision creates the circumstances. That is the iron law that 2 decades of research confirmed without exception. There is a reason this keeps happening to you. And now you know exactly what it is. It is the absence of a decision strong enough to override the subconscious instruction you have been unconsciously running since childhood. The instruction that says, this level is your level. This ceiling is natural. This much is enough for someone like you. That instruction is a lie. It is a lie encoded by repetition, and it can be replaced by truth encoded by the same mechanism. The mechanism is yours. The decision is yours. The life is yours. And somewhere, in a future that is closer than you think and more possible than you have dared to believe, the children you are raising and the partner you share your life with, and the generations who will carry your name forward, are waiting for the person you are capable of being to stop waiting and simply begin. Begin tonight.